Webinars, and I'm Shelly Terrell, and I am joining you today like every Friday, and it's free, so you can bring a friend. And I'm joining you from Texas, but next week I'll be joining you from Thailand, so I'm very excited. Today we're going to talk about exploring language through poetry, and you'll notice that I put a little subtitle as well, Teens and Adults, because I found so many incredible websites for poetry that I decided that the children's activities would be for a later time. But some of these anyone can do. I mean, it would be appropriate for all levels. How many of you actually use poetry with your language learners? We have such an international audience today. Spain and Greece, Ukraine and Poland and Saudi Arabia and Egypt. How cool is that? One of the reasons why I think poetry is so great to use with students is because you can use it with any level, but the great thing about poetry that's different than other pieces of writing is it shows a different form of communication. Many times when people write poetry, it's very introspective and they play with the words, and usually when people write poetry, it's to the level of where they feel comfortable enough to be able to play with words. So really advanced poetry is actually quite complex, and it shows how complex the English language can be. So you have things, for example, like a lot of the words will have different meanings. A lot of phrases will be repeated. The structure, you can study the structure of the English language really well. It encourages a lot of things like listening, it has imagination, and it's creating, and all of this is much deeper than English language. It actually shows the communication process of English. So I think it's really, really an important thing. Oh, Marissa! Hi, Marissa! There are a lot of benefits to integrating poetry with language learners of all levels. Even with my very young learners, 4 years old, I used to use poetry. They were more like chants and different things like that, but we could still even use it at that level. Of course, you'll use different poetry depending on what level of English your learners know, but also for adults and teens, there's a lot of different activities that are more appropriate for them. But the great benefit is it integrates all skills. You have your listening, your speaking, your reading, and your writing. And really, when you teach poetry, I think that you should integrate all of these skills. You should have the students be able to recite it, to listen to it, to see great examples of different types of poems. It explores the use of words to communicate. You can really look at a structure of a word. And a lot of times you'll see like root words and diagrams, and you want your students to be able to study that, because if they study what the roots of words look like or the way they're structured, then they're able to use that to be able to figure out other words. So it's very helpful. But poetry offers a really great, fun, and creative way to be able to do this. It supports creativity, which means that it makes the language learning very interesting. It explores culture. A lot of the things that I do with my students, I used to use poetry. Actually, I did an entire poetry unit for about, I would say, half a semester with my English language learners in Texas. And they were teenagers. And they really enjoyed it because they were able to express their culture. And a lot of them would choose poems that talked about their cultures, and also they would take poems from very famous poets, and then they would translate it into English, and they were able to recite it and share with us something about their past or their history. And there's a lot of poetry out there that will study different types of history and things like that. And then you can look at the structure of words. But before we go on, I want to show you something first. So I'm going to stop right here. And I want us to look and listen to poetry. So I'm going to go ahead and play for you a poem. And this is one of the greatest resources, I think, that's very special about poetry. So we're going to hear a poem by Jeremy Harmer and Steve Bingham. And this is a YouTube video, so hopefully you hear this well.
I knock on the door. She pulls me in. I stay not long enough. She dreams of love. I knock on the door. She lets me in. I stay far too long. She turns me out. I knock on the door. She allows me in reluctantly. I walk in far too far. She turns me out. I knock on the door again and again. She denies me entry. I stumble in, push past her. She turns me out. Again, she turns me out. All this knocking and pulling and turning out. Hey, carpenter, make me a coffin, a small coffin of perfume wood. Our dream just died.
Okay, so now we're back. Can everyone hear me again? Okay, so I put the link to the YouTube video of that, and that's Touchable Dreams. And that's by B. Jeremy Harmer, who teaches the very famous book that you probably had in your CELTA. So, and Jeremy has made this Touchable Dreams, and there's lesson plans that are involved with this. Jason Renshaw at English Raven has many things like a gap fill, which is something that you may want to do with poetry where you have the words down. He has all the lyrics written down as well that you can download. And he has different types of activities associated with it that are actually really just kind of great kind of lesson plans and ideas for any type of poem that you have. But the great thing about this poem is that you have is that the kids can actually hear it and see it being performed. And I think that's one of the great things about poems. So if you think about it way back in history, the way that people found out about great poems and poetry, well, a lot of them didn't have the printed word of it. They didn't have the access to it. And a lot of people at the time, they weren't literate. So they heard it and they saw it being recited. And I think that that's really important when you have poetry, is that it's good to hear and listen to it and be able to see it being performed. A lot of times our students will have problems with the words and things like that, but when they listen to it, it'll have much more meaning to them. And one of the things that Jason suggests is using a wordle, and he has a wordle of this poem, Knocking and Pulling, and then the words, I'll show you what the wordle is, what the word cloud is. And then he suggests having like a quick discussion about it, what possible meanings it could have, and asking each other questions. Then he also recommends that you do something with sight and sound. You divide the class into two halves, listen and watch the performance again with one group, listening to the speaker and the other concentrating on the music. And then to write down their feelings, like what they associate with it. And there's other activities as well. But these are just kind of things that you think about. And when you think about a poem, that's a really good poem for an adult, not necessarily something you would use with an adolescent that's 12 or 13. So I think at this point it's really important that when you're thinking about choices of poetry, especially with English language learners, yes, it's important to know their language level and their abilities, but it's also important to know their stages of development. I really enjoy the stages of development chart. Now this is Erickson, and I tend to be more of a Piaget, but Erickson has a really good one for adults. And he says between 13 and 19 years old, one of the things that they're doing is they're doing identity versus role confusion. So teens at this point are looking at, they care how they look at others. They start forming their own identity by experimenting with who they are. And at this role, it's really important for them to reflect on becoming an adult and how they interact with others. So poetry is a great way to kind of introduce them to these kind of things, or they might like poems about this. 20 to 34, they're thinking about love, starting a family, building relationships. Between 35 and 65, they're thinking about caring. A lot of times you'll see some great poems with about children and wives and family. And then in the later years, 65 plus, I don't know if we always think about it, but I think it's important to think about their developmental stage at this point. And working with adults, and I tend to work with a lot of them as well, they tend to look back on their lives and think about what they have or have not accomplished. And at all these levels, you can see how great that the poetry is just a way for them, when they begin creating themselves poems, for them to reflect as well. So I think these are things that we should keep into consideration. So I'm going to show you some other really cool stuff about this. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so some useful websites, really cool websites for poetry that I found. And there's so many of them. This is languagegarden.org, and not to be confused with languagegarden.com. But this is actually from David Warr, and you can actually make plants just like this, but it's a great way to look at the structure and the stanza, the parallelism, the imagery. There's a lot of things that you can do with the language gardens, including create your own poems. But this is one of the poems that's actually on Language Garden. And all of these you can make yourself. You can even highlight the words. And each word that's highlighted, each color means something else. Like you have the red for the verb. You have the blues, and this is, what would blue be? Like what part of grammar? Can anyone guess? Let's see. And this is exactly what you would do with your students. You would say, well, what? Okay, so we're looking at this poem right here. And can you guess in pairs what each color has? You can put them in pairs, and you can say, okay, tell us what the blue words mean, what the red words mean, the purple words. So can anyone guess what the blue or the purple words are? Okay, yes, very honest. Okay, so she put nouns. Anyone know what the purple are? Yes, exactly. Prepositions. Way to go, hubby. So see, with your students, they get really excited because they can guess some of the grammar. And since we do have to cover grammar, it's a great way for them to see this. But you also see things such as repetition, and it's just very colorful way. And the kids, when they create their own poem, they can go back and they can highlight, and they can actually, they have a wheel on the website where they can move it around and stuff as well. Picklets. Picklets is a great one. With Picklets, you have pictures that come up. You can choose, the students can choose from any of the pictures, and then they get to see, it says nouns, adjectives, adverbs, or freestyle, and they get the words and they drag and drop them so they can create a nice poem. So it's a really great way to get them brainstorming. Let's say that your students need like a little bit of visual stimulation, and it's great. I do think, you know, the activities where it's not necessarily tech all the time, but you like play some instrumental music and have the kids brainstorm and then write a poem out of that. I think that's really great. I think that's great. But if you have web tools, then Picklets is great, and Language Garden is really great as well. And of course, kids usually, well, adults and teenagers as well, have fun with magnetic poetry. And before Web 2.0 time, I actually did this with my students. I would get these trays, these cookie cutter trays, and they were really cheap. They were like maybe you could buy 10 of them for $2 or something. And then I would cut out magnets, and I would have the kids write different kind of letters, and then they could cut up the magnets on magnet strip paper. And this took a lot of time, though. This took a lot of time on class. But here, now they make it so much easier for you because you just go to themagneticpoetry.com and you click on the adult section. It has a kids section and an adult section. And the adult section will go ahead and it'll look like this. That's what you're going to see. So you get all these magnetic words, and you actually get a refrigerator to be able to do this on. So it's really cool. I would definitely recommend that you do this. And then they can save, they can reset it, they can save it, they can change the background, they can listen to it. You can see this like little sound right here. So it's really, really just kind of a fun way for students to be able to get inspired and have this type of poetry. I'll put in the next one. Somebody asked for the last website, so I'll go ahead and put that up. Let's see, the last one is I think it was, oh, Language Garden. Okay. Was it Language Garden? No, it probably wasn't. Okay, I'll find it. Sorry. I don't remember what the last one was. Okay, let's look back here. Oh, Picklets. Okay, I'll go back to Picklets then. And then the next one, with adults, if you happen to use Twitter in the classroom, then you can just do it in 120 characters. I have done this. I really enjoyed the poem that I made with this. And you can have them actually, it'll tweet it out. It's called Twitter Magnets, the at Twitter Magnets. And then you're able to actually, it'll tweet it out for you, 120 characters. So if you want something quick and you want it short, then I would definitely recommend Twitter Magnets. So that's always a really good one as well. And if you have you can save them, you can favorite them, so that way everybody can have them in like one kind of section if you have like a class account. So I will put that as well, but here's the Picklets one. That's the URL for Picklets. Flickr Poet. Flickr Poet is awesome. Okay, so we're going to play another game. And what I want you to do with the Flickr Poets is I went ahead and grabbed the poem here. And you can see the words. So what Flickr Poets does is you actually grab a passage or a poem, and it could be the kids' poems as well. They can type it in. And it finds pictures on Flickr that go with the words. So can anyone guess what this poem is? I know you can't see you can see the picture, so you can't exactly see all of the words. So I want to see if you can guess what this is. Marissa! Marissa has it right. Okay, but what's the name of the poem? So we have the poet, Robert Frost. And you don't really get to pick and choose those. It just kind of comes up, Russ. Yeah, The Road Less Traveled. Very good, Mariana and Marissa. Very good. The Road Less Traveled. Okay, so you can see how this could be kind of to stimulate conversation, especially with adults, because they've heard a lot of poetry. So you could it took me less than a couple of seconds to do this. And then it chooses the pictures for you. So it's a good site for adults. I wouldn't necessarily say for kids because you don't know what kind of pictures are going to exactly come up. But I think it's a really good site. And then they can do it with their poetry. So after they do their poetry, then you can have them see what kind of images come out with it. Now, on this particular website, how do you feel about the picture representations of the words? Oh, thank you, Louise, for putting that together. I think some of them are really kind of creative, like the stood one. I was looking at that stood one, and I can see where Anne stood, you know, how this is standing up. But I thought it was really interesting to be able to take a look at the pictures themselves and see how well they support it. You can have the kids come up and, after doing an activity like this, come up with their own kind of visuals and see how they do compared to that. I think it's good for stanzas, for going into different stanzas, maybe not a whole poem, but maybe something much shorter. Now you want lesson ideas. Well, there's actually a lot of websites that will have you provide you with a lot of lessons. And one of them is lessonstreams.org. And this is by Jamie Ketty. And Jamie Ketty has a few lessons up there under poetry. So that's actually, I haven't marked down, but I did a search on poetry. And he has, if you look at Jamie's, he lists, not only does he list the actual video, this is a video, but this is, it tells you the level, it tells you it's for adults, what it focuses on, which is reading, school memory, and suffixes. So it tells you all of that. It's just a fantastic lesson. You get a PDF. It's absolutely free. And you also get to see the video that goes with it. And by the way, this is a really great video. I would show you, but we're running out of time. So another kind of great idea for lesson ideas for poetry, and you'll have to do the search as well, is at Eva's blog. And Eva, who's evab2001 on Twitter, but she has a really great idea. So what she suggests is actually taking all the words from the poem, putting it in a Wordle, and then each person going up and trying to guess what the poem could be about. And then the really great part about it is she says after you have a word cloud like this, that the students themselves take all the words from the word cloud like this, and they create their own poems in pairs. Okay, so can any of you come up with like at least a line from the words here that could be poetic, a couple of lines, and we'll see what you come up with. And one of the things about it is that after they do this, what she suggests in her post is that the kids get together and they all compare their poetry with the real poem and see which one is the closest. And I think that's just a fabulous idea. That's a great way to introduce a poem, to see which one with the same words comes up with a poem that's very similar to the poem that they're introducing. And I think that's really great for difficult poetry. I know I had to teach my high school students, I had to teach them Shakespeare and some of these old English poets that are really difficult even for language learners, native speakers to understand. So I think this is a really great one to be able to do this with. And it helps them be very creative because they have to come up together with a type of, you know, poem. And so did anybody come up with a poem with this yet? It's not from a poet, though. But you can use Wordle in so many different ways, so it makes it a great site for poetry in general. Now, Marissa actually has a great kind of post for word clouds in general. And Marissa, if you can find that post and you can put it in, because Marissa actually has one to another one. And I believe it's Tagoo, I want to say, that will actually give you shapes. And I think that's really good as well. You'll find lots of ideas and lessons at Scott Thornberry's blog, and you'll find it under P is for poetry. And Scott talks a lot about how to introduce poems, how to introduce the context of a poem. And so many people offer ideas as well on Scott's blog about how to use poetry in class. And when you read Scott's blog, you'll see a lot of things as well about using it in a dogme kind of way where the students think about it themselves. So I think after you introduce the poem, after you dissect, all of those were helping with dissecting the poem, inspiring the reading and creating of poems, the understanding, the context. All of those sites are great for that. And there are other sites we have as well with the context of that. But what happens after your students create a poem? And I think that's one of the most important parts, is to be able to have your students get to the comfort level, and it really helps you assess their English of how well they do to write a poem, because that's a very difficult thing to do if you're not a native speaker of that language. So I think after they go through all that work, try hosting an event. I did this. I did a coffee event, and what we did was we had like an open mic coffee, and what the students did was they just chose from any poem that they wanted to. Thank you, Luis and Marissa, for putting those links. And you'll find much better word cloud tools on Marissa's blog. But when you host an event, think about how they can put their culture with that. So some of my students, one of the things they did was they had to have a visual. I said, you know, when you're reciting the poem, you can choose any of the poems we studied, and we studied different types of poems. We studied haikus, we studied limericks, we studied sonnets, we studied all of these different types of poems, and then they chose one that they had created, and then they were supposed to focus on their culture and bring a little bit of culture to it. Some of them had their friends play guitar or like a harp. Some of them created this elaborate storyboards with this. Some of them brought in props. This girl, she chose to read this poem about red shoes, and she actually bought red shoes that came with it. So I gave them the freedom. I just said you have to include some kind of visual support for your poem. And they got together, and this is what they came up with. We served coffee, we had like an open mic, we invited the parents, the staff, and the kids really, really, really enjoyed this. One of the things that I've also done with students at this age, especially the teenagers, is slam poetry. And there's a really great slam poem about English language itself to give you an idea of what that is. And so I'm going to go ahead and get that. This is from Macmillan Dictionary, and you can actually go visit the website and find it yourself. But I won't show it here right now because we're running out of time. But you can see what a slam poem looks like. And this slam poem, when the kids, they get to act it out and things like that. Now, what I did was I showed them some examples of what slam poetry is, and it's kind of like, excuse me, like hip hop poetry in a way, and you use a lot of gestures, and it's a little bit more of a free form. So that was a really fun thing with them. And if you do an event like this, if you do have like a coffee shop and things like that, and you have some of the kids serve the coffee, if you need to raise any funds for technology in your classroom or anything like that, after you get permission from the staff and stuff, then go ahead and use it as a fundraiser to raise money. So you're using the ideas, the kids are using the ideas, the teenagers, to be able to support a cause, and that's always really exciting. And that's when the shy students, even those that are really shy, have read in my class out loud to others, they were able to do this because they were supporting a cause. So I could always say it's for the cause. Publish it online. If you don't do an event, then you can simply publish it online. A lot of people will use VoiceThread.com, and VoiceThread is amazing. You can make different types of poems, collaborative poems. You can evaluate poems. In the links that I'm going to provide you towards the end of this, you'll see a lot of links where if you type in poetry and do like a search of it, you can see all the different types of lessons and ways they use VoiceThread for poetry. And it was very creative. Like, I really enjoyed all the different ways that the teachers were using VoiceThread for poetry. But the great thing is that when a student publishes it on VoiceThread, they don't have to use their face. Like, here she uses her face, and she uses her voice to recite her favorite poem that she chose. But the great thing is that other people can come up, and there are other teachers that will come up, and students, and will say, hey, that's a great poem, or I really like the way that you read this poem, or I really love what you said about this poem. You can use posturist.com. I have actually published my poem on posturist.com, and my students get to see it, but Posturist will let you record it in audio quite easily, and then you can have the words right there. You can take a video, you can show videos of it, you can publish. If the students make their own videos, like visual videos with the words and things like that, then they can publish them on the Posturist. And it's an app. There's a free app on your iPhone, your iPad, and your Android. So when you have this, when you have posturous, you can even do it if you have an internet connection. You have to have the internet connection, but you can do it online, and then you can publish it on the go, so you don't even need anything except the phone. So that's always great. You can use Glockster.com. A lot of the students love to use Glockster to express themselves. They can add pictures. They can add video, voice. They can add text, and it'll scroll down. They can add visuals, like little pictures, and these are Creative Commons that are on the Glockster site itself, and it's free. You go to Glockster.com. You can do backgrounds as well. But the best way that I saw it used was this incredible one here, and I bookmarked it. But it's so incredible because this is her e-portfolio, her poetry e-portfolio, and you click any of these images and it lands to another Glockster with that poem. You see how many poems this girl was inspired to write? And our teenagers can really do this. You know, they get really excited when they get these tools and they're able to be very creative. And the great thing about it, I used to have my students make these big poetry books, and then I would have them do a flash drive and a CD disc. But now with these websites, they can publish it to the world. People can comment on it, and they can have it for life. Well, at least, you know, a digital version. And the bad thing about the portfolios, the ones in my classroom, is when I moved to Germany and I started teaching in Germany, I couldn't carry those with me, and it was something that I always felt like kind of sad about. But now this way, I can do that. Well, thank you so much. We're actually just about in time to wrap this up. So I know it's a lot and a lot of ideas, but there's so many great kind of poetry sites, and there's so many more that I didn't show you. I'll show you when we talk about this with language learners, with young learners. But you can find every single type of bookmark here at the bit.ly.elt links, which is this Life Binders right here. Yes, exactly. There are a lot more on the Life Binder. And we're going to talk about those probably next week when we talk about how to use poetry with young language learners, because there are different ways to do that as well. And so thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions, or do any of you have any suggestions of what you use for poetry? I know Marissa probably has some great ideas of how to use poetry. And particularly with adults and teenagers, because I think this is a really important group that you can use different types of poetry with. And it always depends if whether you're trying to teach the structure, if you're trying to teach about culture, or introduce a subject or a topic, or just inspire creativity, is the way that you would approach teaching with a poem. And so whatever you think would be the most inspirational. But I always think that the best way is to get the students themselves to be here and to come in with their own poems, so you can get an idea what they like. Yes, for the Flickr Poet site, when you click on, you'll see an empty box, and all you do is you type in the words, or you can copy and paste from a website. That's how you use the Flickr Poet. Okay, and Bob said put a website about English UK punk poetry. And then Marissa was saying to use haikus. I think haikus are really great too. And there's this great haiku maker that I'll talk about in the next poetry one. Yeah, I think it's really good to mix real life learning as well. Well, thank you all so much. Have a great weekend. I'm going to go get ready because I fly in a few hours to Bangkok. So I will see you next Friday from